What I'd like to share today is it's really an intersection, if we think about it, an intersection of animal husbandry, commerce, capitalism. We can still use that word in this country. Care and compassion for animal welfare. And then we want to feed the world with the best beef possible. And that takes a collaborative effort of buyers and sellers and those involved in the industry. So as we move through this, think about if you're a bull seller, your vantage point, and if you're one of those people that are going to buy these bulls, how are you going to use them? And then what's those relationships of bull seller and buyer, and how can we get the most out of that effort of genetic potential? We want to begin with the end in mind. When I think about bulls and the many different systems that are involved that they might go to. So this over on the left-hand side, that's a place in Louisiana. In the middle, that's Carlsbad, New Mexico. That's 1 cow per section or more. That's a little bit different than that picture in the middle. It's in central Missouri. The picture on the far right is a ranch that borders Mexico, south of Tucson. Then you have where the cactus is, and that's near Van Horn, Texas. You know what's exciting about that? And we think about the challenges that we have with seedstock production and commercial operations is there's 750,000 cow-calf producers in the country. And if you're selling bulls, you're going to sell to several different types of people. Some with yard art. Some people just want to look at their animals. Some want for tax purposes. Some are really, truly cattlemen that want to feed the world. Those ranches, those ecosystems are connected to a people. My friend Dr. Mazik there in Bouche, Louisiana, he tells me it's French. The gentleman, Mr. Richardson from Carlsbad. The gal in the pickups from Texas County, Oklahoma, and Guyman. Ross Humphreys from Arizona. The Zimmerman, the family, and the Mennonite families from central Missouri. They all have different needs. Craig Means from the Van Horn, Texas area. They're all people. And you know what? Every animal that we sell is connected to a person. They're connected to us before we sell it. So what's our job? So we have to understand that I just want to put perspective up there. When we do a census, and it's shown at the end of this month, there might be fewer than 29 million cows. Think about that, 1.1 million bulls that needed to be to service those cows. Probably not quite that much, but just the Angus industry sold 52,000 bulls. That's a lot of genetic potential that we're going to transmit. So we want to make genetic improvement. Ultimately, we're going to feed the world with the very best protein possible. And there's no other animal that can eat that forage system other than those cows. So we're going to start with a group of bulls up there, and we got to have the people in mind that we're going to sell to. So here's what we have to have. We have to keep in mind. We have seed stock producers. We have commercial cow producers. As seed stock producers, we're going to use the best animal husbandry to raise those cattle, those athletes to go out and breed cows. We have to communicate with one another. We have to communicate to those buyers why they should buy our bulls. And that's through genetic potential. That's through how we sell our services as a seed stock people. Then we go hand those off. We go deliver them. We go give those to those producers. Then there's some more communication. So that circle there is what that intersection of commerce looks like. Those people coming to our place and looking through our bulls and buying the very best bull to fit their needs. So I just want to lay the framework of raising these bulls. I say easy does it. You know, we used to see people push these bulls and use a lot of grain to do it. What we know today that we can use a lot of forage diet. And I contend these bulls, just like stocker cattle, can be raised with a low forage diet that's fairly highly digestible and accomplish the same thing. We only need to get them to weigh 1,200 pounds breeding age by 12 to 13 months of age. We can do that by using, many people use it, total mixed ration today. Just make sure your forages are long, you mix them right. Now this is the talk of a nutritionist. I tell people I'm a dietitian, not a nutritionist, but this is the groundwork. This is the basics of it. Test those forages. So I have a son that's joined us in our practice, and he has an interest in nutrition work, and he's helped me understand that not all feeds are created equal, even though they're these same piles. And he's helped me with my own nutrition by just testing these forages. They vary tremendously. Please don't use book values. So that way you don't miss the mark. What's the highest cost that we have today? It's feed cost today. And we need to get the most out of that. Balance those rations. So one of the things that I've learned a long time ago, there's many other minerals that we need to concentrate also, but when we're raising bulls, we need to make sure that those micronutrients, particularly zinc, is really important. And we worked with Larry Cora back in the early 90s we put zinc at nearly 90 parts per million in our rations to make sure it's fortified. And we think that's real important to accomplish that. Also important today is using an ionophore, Rumensin or Bovatect. Both of those are going to increase our digestibility and decrease our feed costs. So those are just some basics. Now I want you to think about this. I learned when I can't figure something out in the beef industry, guess who's done it more often than not? It's the dairy industry. Those dairy industry people have feet problems. They've had feet problems forever. And so I go to look at their literature. And what I've found is there are so many things that we can learn in the beef industry from what's already been done. So there's several conditions. Remember I talked about when forage gets too short, we can have forages that are good high fiber forages. If we make them too short in the rumen considers them as a concentrate. So I want you to, there's a condition in particularly the dairy heifer called a subacute ruminal acidosis. And it creates some feed issues. We've seen that in beef cattle, whether it's in the feed yard, bulls or heifers. And that just has to do with how we present that feed to them. And then also, we need to make sure they have plenty of places to lay down. You know, in the dairy industry, they work tremendously hard at making sure those dairy cows have a place to lay down and get off their feet. That's not just so they can rest or ruminate, that's so they can physically get off their feet. So think about these moments of stress, and these pens are muddy, these bulls don't have a place to lay down, they can't rest, they can't get off their feet, and I think we're creating some challenges for them because we're pushing them, even with a high forage diet, to maintain that sort of growth. And we want to give them a place to lay down. And we talk about bedding all the time anymore. And I think bedding's important, not for just when it's cold, but even for when it's hot. So those cattle can feel comfortable laying down. We see that happening more and more in the feed yard industry. When we had our little stretch of cold, I know forage is high, even corn stalks are high, but we put those out as bedding. Just a few thoughts briefly on foot scores. I think they're a good idea. I think we probably score those a little bit too early, and we're not really identifying the problem. I was visiting with Mark McCauley this morning and saying that an incident that we had a commercial client, take an animal to K-State to have him looked at the feet, and the clinician called me and said, well, this animal has screw toe. Okay. So what causes that? Well, she's a donor. Oh, just because she's a donor, she got screw toe. So my challenge to her was when I started to ask her questions, and they get a little defensive when I don't have I have DVM, but I don't have PhD and a bunch of other initials after my name. When I start asking, so what do you think causes that? Well, she's big and fat. So no, what do you think causes that? I think we have to maintain a curious mind to say, what causes some of those feed issues? Maybe it's lack of movement, but we see that in all breeds. All breeds have feed issues, but we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say they're bad. Let's work at that collaboratively to figure that problem or challenge out. We think their feed are either acceptable or not acceptable. When those cattle go to Carlsbad, New Mexico, and they have to compete to look for forages, they have to get around. That thing needs more work. All breeds have an issue. So something I'd like to just visit with briefly about. As a seed stock producer and as a commercial cattleman, you're going to have bulls fertility tested. And it's a very frustrating time for some, and it's glorious for others. And what I want us to think about, when we do a fertility test on a bull, and we say, today, is he a satisfactory breeder today? That's all I can tell you. The question I have to ask myself, and I have a few cows, so I can experience this, would I turn this bull out by himself in my cows and expect him to breed and be okay? So to do that, and I want us to think about this. There is no quantification in this test. How good a breeder he is, I don't know. He passes a fertility test today. That's all I can tell you. So please don't use it as a quantification. One time I heard one producer say, well, I test mine at 11 months of age, and that means his heifers are going to be more fertile. Okay, that's hogwash. That's hogwash. Let's make it a good science and don't extrapolate it. So here's what we use. Just briefly here, this is the form from the American Society of Theriogenology. A group of veterinarians have put the standards together, and I don't expect to see a lot here, but physical exam and then a few other things to consider. But let me just put it here. There's 3 areas. When we fertility test a bull, we measure scrotum. And he has to meet these standards right here. He has to, at 15 months of age, he has to have a 30-centimeter scrotum. If he doesn't pass that, we can stop there. He doesn't pass or fail with that parameter. Then we measure, once we get an ejaculation in a sample, this bull has to have fair motility. And you think, oh my goodness, Randall, that's not very good. That's not my deal. I didn't set the standards, but that's what we know has to happen. He has to have at least fair motility, 30 to 49% of them moving. Normally that's not the case, but that's as low as we can go. But when we look at sperm morphology, they have to be 70% normal sperm. Usually if you have a really low motility, you're going to have a low morphology problem. Now, if the bull passes or fails on each one of those, and I got to tell you a story. Last year I had a veterinarian, or actually a producer from Tennessee, called me and said, yeah, I normally buy my bulls at the auction market. I said, oh, good. I didn't say that out loud. But he was a commercial guy buying bulls at a commercial auction. And that makes me really nervous for a number of reasons. He said, but these bulls had a 70 and a 40 and an 80 on them, and I said, painted on them. I said, so what's that mean? Well, he had 70%. He scored a 70. Well, before my time period, early on in my practice life, the Society for Theriogenology, if you remember, if you're old enough, had a scoring system, and they had to have 70. And they used these different parameters to get to 70. Well, that's not the case anymore. The bull either passes or fails today according to each one of these potentials. And I encouraged this gentleman, I said, that's an outdated system, and it's way too subjective for today. And I want to encourage you that you can do better than that. So want to talk about this. Doing this physical exam, this breeding soundness exam, it's a story. And as a veterinarian, it's probably why I'm a little bit challenged with some physical ailments, but I've tested a number of bulls over the years. And there's a lot of up and downs. And one of the things I do is I feel all those scrotums. I measure the scrotums myself because I want to feel. Because it's a story. It's not just run them in the chute, throw the probe into them, get an ejaculation, and look at it. I want to feel the scrotum to see what I'm thinking because it's part of the story. We do look at feet and legs as they're coming in. If I'm testing herd bulls, I like to walk through those herd bulls before they come in to see if they're lame or not. Because I don't want to pass a bull, give it vaccination, and watch it walk out and say, you got 60 days before you can sell that bull, so I sure wouldn't use him because his back legs are terrible. So ask your veterinarian or make sure you walk through those bulls beforehand. Look at their feet and legs, their structure. So I palpate all those bulls. I like to get my hands in them and to feel those seminal vesicles, and I make that urethra to pulsate a little bit so that when I get ready to put the probe in, it doesn't take quite as much effort. I measure that scrotum. I want to feel those testicles, maybe ones, and to feel the epididymis. And then I feel the tone of those testicles. Now, a lesson that I've learned is, and I tell you, we have a number of young veterinarians that come through our practice, and I tell them, now if you feel something under there that you don't like, don't say, oh my goodness, because that kind of raises a bad connotation in the producers right behind you thinking, well, what's wrong? Or when we're testing these bulls, invariably we'll start testing some herd bulls here in January, and with the cold weather and they're not out there ejaculating, it'll take several samples to get a good test until I know what I'm getting is correct, a representative sample. So make sure you see your veterinarian, you palpate those testicles, because if he doesn't pass, there might be a reason. And if there's a reason, you want to know that, and you can't tell it by just what's on the slide. That's part of being thorough. And I'm kind of old age and kind of picky there. So one thing I don't say is, well, that bull's testicle's soft, he'll never be any good. I'm reminded of a story of a bull called the junkyard bull. I didn't pass him, and I don't look to see what their numbers are when they're coming in. I don't want to know. I don't want to know if lot 1 or lot 200, because I just want to pass the bull. Is he pass or fail on his merit? This bull evidently had some merit, and I couldn't pass him over a couple times. I said, well, he's got soft testicles. And I was probably a young veterinarian. I had my arms crossed, and I know best. Well, unbeknownst to me, the bull was sent to Virginia and put in a junkyard, and several months later, the bull was tested. He evidently had the genetic merit. A bull stud collected him, and he passed semen. So I'm reminded that I don't know everything. And I've learned over a period of time that maybe we need to go back and retest those animals and give them another opportunity. But I can't do that by making those subjective statements. So my goal with ejaculation is no vocalization. I don't often accomplish this, but I think this is something for all of us to be concerned about when the animal welfare people start to see us using these tools. We have to be careful with how we do it. We want to see that penis and feel the scope of that penis. There's times that I've found a little bitty wart on the other side that I can't see. So it's part of being thorough, and if I'm not down there collecting him, I can't do that. Warts can be a problem, but warts are solvable, caused by papillomaviruses, and there's 15 strains of papillomaviruses out there today, and it's okay. I had one veterinarian producer call me back in 12, 13, 14, when bulls were $14,000 a piece, and the veterinarian had said, well, nope, those bulls aren't going to be any good, and they sent them to slaughter. And I got weak in the knees and hyperventilated a little bit for him, because it cost him over $100,000. As seedstock producers, those are solvable. 99% of them are solvable. Just be patient with them. And I don't feed my warts orally to the bulls and think that does any good. Now, I do think there are some tools that are coming out that we might be available to specifically take care of some of those warts. Well, I'm watching that. Persistent frenulum is a problem, particularly in these young bulls, and you got to see and feel that penis. Sometimes we'll see that whole shaft of the penis be infected, and it'll be really thickened. You got to be there to see it. So we get those samples, and those samples will vary. How long do I do it? I've been known to stand on my head to try to get a sample out of those bulls as long as I know those testicles feel good to me. And we've got to be persistent about it, because I'm realizing this bull could be a 4,000, it could be 2,000. I don't care the value of it, but it's important to this seed stock producer, and it's important to the person he's selling that to. And I look at it, it's like it's my animal. If we have to understand those semen cells that we see were produced 60 days ago. And if there was a traumatic event like cold weather, extended cold weather, that's a challenge. Remember, 2 years ago this coming February, that was a pretty challenging time. We had 14 days of sub-zero weather. When all of these criteria are met, he's got the right size of scrotum, his testicles feel good, but I can't get what I would think a representative sample. I set him on the shelf and I said, let's test him again. Let's just don't throw him away. I understand as a veterinarian, a guy that's been called to do this, to the investment that's been made, and I'm going to do everything I can to get the best sample, see those bulls sell. So we have to think about this. We're going to move on there. These animals are raised in a particular location. And if we think about, they're raised in Nebraska, all 50 states have seed stock producers in it. And they're sold to people that are miles and miles away in a different ecosystem. For instance, we know those animals, we had a veterinary student spend a summer with us, and we picked up fecal samples from every different management style and system, thinking, well, some of these places are going to have parasites because they don't use dewormers. We live in such an area that we found very, very few parasites in these fecal samples all summer, even in calves. It's making me think about the strategic deworming. But I know that people, so I have a picture in mind. If you live east of I-35 and south of I-40, your ecosystem is probably different than Clark County, Kansas. You probably have more rain than we do, most years. And that means your disease prevalence may be different than what ours is. Doesn't make it wrong. It's just different. And we have to understand when you're buying or selling an animal, where is it from? What disease pressures are present in that herd? There was a large study done in the state of Kansas looking at anaplasmosis. Over 9,500 beef cows were sampled from the eastern third of Kansas to the western third of Kansas. 89% of those herds in the eastern third of the state of Kansas had anaplasm present. In western Kansas, that western third, I didn't think it'd be this high, but 37% of those herds, commercial cows, when we preg checked them, had anaplasm present. So that doesn't make it good or bad. We just have to know that. And when you're buying an animal and sending or selling an animal to that area, that's where that communication starts. This is starting to take place. You might want to consider, have you thought about what are your challenges? And as seed stock producers, you can help form that communication so that they can be successful with your product. That's what makes us all different than Walmart and challenges of the retail place. So please keep in mind, we have the most opportunity to help our animals succeed. You know, I tell people, I want to be the second veterinarian that looks at an animal. This is what I think is wrong with your animal. This is what is necessary. Go home and treat it with this. But I give them permission to call me back and say, if it's not responding by this day, call me back, or this expectation. I think as seed stock producers and commercial cattlemen, that cycle of communication is just as important as what's underneath that hide. So where are they going? If you think about each one of those ecosystems, their disease pressures are going to be different. They're going to be challenged. They have their own challenges. What's their disease prevalence? So these are some things that I think are extremely important. BVD. As a veterinarian, when somebody comes to me and I haven't done much work for them, I ask them, what's your BVD program? Oh, we vaccinate for it. I said, great. Have you tested for it in your heifers when you put them, before you breed them? No. What about, and then I don't ask in a way, knowing what their fences are like. What's your biosecurity like? I used to sleep through that word in veterinary school thinking it wasn't important, but it's pretty important today. Let me tell you that when you have a fire and you have no fences in Clark County, Kansas in 2017, and we had open range, we had cattle walking down the road, and we had an instance where we'd never had BVD on a cow herd. We had 2 PI calves that fall, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I did something wrong. No, we just had no fences and biosecurity. And one neighbor put his 2 calves on the road in with his cows, and he told his neighbor, and his neighbor said, oh good, those are my PI calves. You just put them in with your pregnant cows. That helped me understand the importance of that. We have to know. You know what really makes me weak in the knees is these bulls. Remember, we used to have a lot of bull test stations, and we'd feed these bulls together, 3, 4, 5 in a group, and there was no BVD control, no consideration of BVD. Did you know that if you have a PI calf over here, and he's running with some other bulls that aren't PIs, he transmits it to these other bulls. Those won't become PIs, but he can have BVD in his scrotum for 18 months. That means he passes fertility test, he goes out here and breeds my cows, and he's transmitting BVD. That's a scary thought. I would rather know my bulls that I buy are PI negative, and I'll take my chances on a fertility test if I can just feel their scrotum. That's so important. That's the cornerstone of a herd health program. That's the beginning of when I start talking about it. And as a service that as seedstock producers, we need to consider that. So important. And today, every year we find a herd or 2 that have PI problems. And we'd say, well, you need to check with your seedstock producer to see what their BVD program is. Oh, they all test. Not a true statement. We as veterinarians have done a poor job of sometimes communicating the need to do that. And that's an area that I probably believe my own lies, but it's the truth. We got to do that, please. Parasites. What are your parasite burdens in your area? We know we don't have any. We have very few. We send a young bull from Ashland, Kansas to east of I-35 and that has never been exposed to parasites. When he goes to that area, he's going to be challenged. Doesn't make him bad, doesn't make him wrong. We have to understand that. My friend in Louisiana, I told Dr. Mazik, I said, make sure when you bring these bulls down there, after they've been there for 90 days, you deworm those with a white dewormer. And you help your commercial operators do the same thing. That's part of the communication as a seedstock producer to help them understand the environment they came from and what they need. What's those nutrient requirements that they need? And we're going to talk about the age of these animals when they leave. Anaplasma is a concern, and I think it's a growing concern. There was just a short study done, and I can't hang my hat on it yet, but there was a group of bulls that were measured at Manhattan in a research trial. They were negative anaplasma, and some were given anaplasma and some weren't, and it was just a very small study. But what they were measuring was a fertility score of those bulls after they incubated the disease. Think about this. If you got a set of bulls, they were brand new, they've never been exposed to anaplasma, and they were exposed to anaplasma 14 to 20 days before the breeding season, and they happen to become transiently infertile at the beginning of the breeding season, that's a problem. Ask yourself and ask your veterinarian, ask those people that are there involved, what is the consequences of them being exposed to that disease at that particular time if it matches up wrong? I can remember those. There's one herd that I preg checked in the fall where I did 90 cows before lunch one day. That afternoon I did 40 more cows. The 90 cows were all bred. The 40 cows weren't bred. The good thing, none of them, zero. And the people, I was just the messenger, but it got really quiet around the chute. To this day, I don't know what went wrong there. I fertility tested the bull afterwards, but something was wrong with him transiently during that breeding season. Not saying anaplasm was, but single sire pastures really concerned me. So anaplasm has to be a consideration. I think it's becoming more prevalent, and we don't understand it as well as we'd like it. It's not a black and white disease. 30 years ago, I thought if you give LA200 to a cow, it'll go away. But we know an animal will remain a carrier for anaplasm for the rest of its life, and it will go up and down. Leptos are concern for your area. Some animals carry it more. What about the feral pigs? They're a real problem south of here in Texas and other areas. We don't tend to see those much. Deer are a problem. Be concerned and be alert for that. Trichomoniasis, generally not a problem in virgin bulls, and I've tested thousands of virgin bulls, and they're all negative. But so not too long ago, I sent some bulls to Texas, and this manager sent me a letter back that fall and said, can you prove that this bull was trick negative because we have trick in our herd? Oh, I was pretty concerned, but we had records that we could back that up. Please don't go to the sale barn and buy a cow freshener. That's a really bad idea. Leasing bulls I know it's done a lot. People are very successful at it. That's very disconcerting, and I'd highly recommend to my clients to tell them that's a really challenging situation. Maybe I've even said that's a bad idea. So you've sold that bull. What do your clients need to succeed? That bull needs to be ready to go. Use that delivery mechanism as an opportunity to see what their husbandry looks like, see where you're dropping them off. Not all producers are created equal. The challenge today is we see these ranches growing in size. Sometimes the owners or maybe live in a large metropolitan area, and their managers are out here, and their managers don't want to always succeed these animals to succeed. So make sure, as a producer, as a veterinarian, when I'm doing work, I make sure I talk to the owner and have communication with the people that are actually doing the work, because I got to build both relationships at the same time. And I think that as seedstock producers, that's a great opportunity to cement it. It takes time, it takes effort, but that's how your product's going to be successful. And if you're buying those bulls, how do you want those to succeed? And it takes communication. They're a long-term investment. They're very expensive today. But we want to get the most value out of those bulls. And if you're buying those bulls and you live and you don't live on the ranch, what are your expectations of nutrition? How do you expect them to be taken care of? That's our job. That word animal husbandry, used to be when my dad was in not veterinary school, when he was a dairy science major in the 1940s and 50s, it was talked about animal husbandry. Today, I think we need to come back to that word. We need to come back to care and compassion and how we take care of these animals. They're not widgets. They're not an inanimate object. They have to have some thought to succeed. And we have the tools today to do that. We have to be mindful of those bulls. Everybody says, well, I want an older bull because they don't break down. But nobody wants to pay the cost of buying a 2-year-old bull. They don't. When we offer those 2-year-old bulls, they don't pay as much for them. But what happens? When we have a set of heifers, they're 18-month-old heifers, they're bred, we run those heifers by themselves, and everybody knows a 3-year-old doesn't rebreed as much as good, right? It's because they're still growing. Their teeth come in at 18 months of age. They lose teeth. So we sell a bull, and let's say in this time of year from now to turnout, and we get him back in, and he's gone to pot and said, well, I'm not going to buy bulls from them again. They fall apart. Sure they should. But as a commercial cow operator, how do you take care of those first calf heifers? We baby them a little bit. We give them special attention, don't we? These bulls are the same thing. Let's give them special attention. They have a different nutrient need. They need more energy to get by. So one time I was looking at grass samples in the Flint Hills. Come August, that grass is like this stuff. It's way different than that short grass that we have in western Kansas. It has no fiber. So these bulls were just turned out, these young bulls were turned out on it with no supplementation. We're surviving, we're doing fairly well. There's still protein and energy in our short grasses at that time. So there might be even a little bit of disease pressures. So these young bulls were falling apart. Fortunately, that commercial cowman called seedstock producer and said, these bulls aren't looking so good. So we went by and looked at him and redefined his feeding program a little bit. We asked questions. We saw that the stool was stacking up this tall. That means there was no protein in it. That's where I'm a dietitian. I can tell when cows and bulls aren't getting enough energy and protein. Look at their stools. So those help people understand that we sell younger bulls today than we did 30, 40 years ago. The market dictates that. But let's go help them take care of those. So I'll pick on animal science people at K-State. Years ago, I went to a meeting and they said, well, when you get these young bulls, just go throw them out with the old bulls and let them decide who's the winner right away. I wanted to throw my hat on the ground and stomp on it, and his too. He has no skin in the game to say that. These young bulls, they have a hard enough time without killing each other. But don't go throw them in with herd bulls. Let them acclimate. Let's take good care of them. Going back to animal husbandry, to caring about their well-being. That's an animal welfare issue. That's compassion. We all have that. It's here. It's not just science. It's animal well-being. So sometime go look at those teeth of those animals that are, when you're breeding heifers, look at their teeth. They don't have very many there. They're nubbed down. And then when they get to be breeding heifers, you go look at them at 18 months and they got 2 big ones in the front, and that's it. And we're asking them to compete with the cow. It's the same thing with the bull. I think this little parameter right here is something that we can really, really help communicate that circle. And there's people those people that own bulls, that have a large ranching conglomerate, that buy those bulls, they want your genetics, and they know that, but they don't understand the animal husbandry involved there. That's where we need to take that next step forward and help them communicate. Help them to talk about how are we going to take care of those animals? How are we going to help them to succeed? Many of you have very generous policies as far as taking care of those animals that break down, but I think that you can help yourselves by communicating a little more directly about how to take care of them. We talked about disease prevalence in different geographic locations. If you're a seed stock producer, what's your disease prevalence? What's your challenges? What environment are you selling to? So here again, if you're selling out in Nebraska and you're going east of I-35 and south of I-40, it's way different than if you're going the other direction. We talked a little bit about commingling. The challenge that I get is we fertility test these bulls, and people, they take them to 500 miles away, and the day they get them there, they take them to their veterinarian, they test them again and say, well, this bull doesn't pass his test. Really? Sorry for my sarcasm. I say, well, he was stressed with a long bus ride and he's tired. Why don't you just turn him out? Turn him out and let him rest for a while. If you want to be sure, let him rest for a while. Doesn't work that way. Sometimes you have to come alongside. We as a profession, as a veterinary profession, I'm challenged with finding enough good young veterinarians to come do what I do. And it's going to take you producers to come alongside of them and say, hey, have you thought about this? Have you thought about doing this? Could we try this? Don't worry about the outcome of this. Give those young people an opportunity. Coach them along. Be confident in them. There's many young, engaged, curious people that want to do it, but they have to be encouraged. So they might get tested again. They're going to need to be acclimated. So maybe if you're a seedstock producer and you're turning out the 1st of April, but you're wanting to buy a bull at the end of March and turn out right away, maybe those people have a bull you could buy at a previous sale. So you can bring him home and let him get acclimated to your environment. Cold weather and bedding, we've talked about that. That's so important to take care of those bulls. Give them a chance to lay down and rest. So we want to talk about being intentional, and we want to talk about we as veterinarians need to be held accountable for this. Many times, and we talk about anaplasm, and we talk about bovine leukosis, and we talk about the transmission of those diseases. We can do that with needles. We can do that with tattoo guns. We can do any sort of transmission of blood, and we need to think about being one needle per animal. We had an opportunity to go to Russia, and we were involved with several large export projects of dairy cattle. And then that particular group wanted to export some registered animals from the state of Kansas, so they put an all-points bulletin out, and they found people that wanted to sell some heifers. And these exporters came to me and said, after we tested them for leukosis, and many of these herds had 80% infection rate of bovine leukosis. And they said, well, Randall, the test is wrong. They were from Dutch, and I said, no, the test isn't wrong. I didn't want to tell them most people over-vaccinate their cattle, and they don't change the needles, and they come from areas where there's horse flies, and that test is right. They had to have 2 negative leukosis tests to get on a boat to go to Russia. So we as producers, we need to think about what I call one needle per animal so that we're not the ones that are transmitting that disease. When you have your bulls fertility tested in the spring of the year or whenever you turn out, make sure your veterinarian's changing the needles. Consider that. It's an expensive proposition, but I think if we save lives in the process of that, we can help ourselves. Be very careful with single sire pastures. It happens every year. Some guy says, we're not getting along very good. The bull's still running with the cows. And this one guy, we had 5 bred out of 32, and he said, don't suppose I probably should have checked those a little more often. And the bull comes through and he had an issue, and he probably didn't breed very many cows later on. They're an athlete. We talked about parasite control. We've talked about teeth. What do we do when we're done with those bulls? Let's look at their feet. Let's make sure they didn't have any pupusal lacerations that need to be attended to. Let's put them on appropriate plan of nutrition. Maybe we need to feed those particular bulls, feed them a little bit better after we take them off to prepare them for the next breeding season so that we know if there's a problem at that particular time. It's being intentional and prescriptive. And here again, as ranches grow and there's a disconnect between management and those taking care of them, I think as seed stock producers, we're all in a good place to ask the questions. We can't tell people what to do, but I gain more from saying, have you thought about that animal by its age and how it's going to do well for you? Ownership requires an investment. One time, a young man came to me and asked me if I could take my daughter to the prom. He liked his car, and I said, "Do you like your car?" "Yeah." "You change the oil in your car?" "Yeah." You work hard to pay for everything that goes into that car?" "Yeah." I said, "My daughter's 16. We've invested in her life. We've taken care of her. We've mentored her. We've cared for her." And you think, well, that's not the same thing. Not to the degree. It's a real life I'm talking about. But I got that guy to think. He was scared of me. The same thing can happen whether you're a seedstock producer or you're a commercial cowman here today. It's the investment that you make and how will you succeed with that. We have to combine science. We have to combine animal husbandry. We have to combine capitalism, because today we want to feed the world with the very best protein, the very best tasting protein, and we've enjoyed tremendous success in the growing of that demand. CAB pays producers $3.5 million every week. That's real money. But ultimately, we provide the very best protein to feed the world today. And we do that by having these animals eat cellulose in various ecosystems. And we all can take ownership of this process, this circle of communication. And we can take the very best science, and we can put skin in the game, and we can succeed today. So again, thank you for the invitation to share. I appreciate it.